There are empires we remember, and empires we were never meant to. The Sassoons weren't kings or conquerors. They didn't rule with armies, they ruled with addiction. From the alleys of Baghdad to the ports of Bombay, they built a dynasty on a single flower, the poppy. Their trade wasn't spice or silk, it was suffering. And with it, they reshaped Asia, rewrote morality, and became the most powerful merchants the world forgot. But history has a pulse, and every empire leaves a shadow. The Sassoons may be gone, but the system they built is still alive, hidden in plain sight. There are families that rule openly because their names on buildings, their faces on money. And then there are families that rule in whispers. The Sassoons were the latter, a dynasty that began as refugees and rose to become one of the most powerful merchant empires in human history. They didn't conquer with armies, they conquered with addiction. Before there was the Sackler family and OxyContin, before Big Pharma discovered how to profit from pain, the Sassoons discovered how to industrialize desire. Their product wasn't a pill, it was a flower, the poppy. And with it, they reshaped the destiny of nations. It begins in Baghdad, 1832. The Ottoman Empire rules the city, a place of crumbling palaces and desperate merchants. Among them, a man named David Sassoon, treasurer to the governor, respected, cautious, observant. But politics turns faster than profit. The governor demands money that Sassoon cannot pay. Rumors spread, arrest, confiscation, perhaps worse. And so, one night, David Sassoon gathers his family, his ledgers, and his faith, and flees. He moves first to Persia, then across the desert, until the ships of the British East India Company come into view. His destination, Bombay, a British port city pulsing with trade, the new heart of global capitalism. Here, ships arrive heavy with silver and leave heavy with cotton. The streets are chaos, languages collide, fortunes rise and fall overnight. But in that chaos, Sassoon sees something most men miss: opportunity. He arrives with almost nothing, but he carries something more valuable than money. He has connections, a network of Jewish and Arab merchants that stretches across the Middle East, built on trust instead of treaties. He has knowledge, the kind that can't be taught: how to read power, how to survive it, and how to serve it. And he has timing, because just as he steps onto Indian soil, Britain is solving its greatest economic crisis by turning a continent into a narcotics plantation. You see, Britain had a problem. China was bleeding it dry. The British wanted tea, mountains of it, but China didn't want anything Britain made. They demanded silver, and year after year, Britain's wealth flowed east, never to return. The empire was losing its lifeblood, and so it found a new one: opium. Under the banner of the East India Company, fields of poppies bloom across Bengal and Bihar. The raw opium is pressed, processed, and packed into chests, ready to be shipped to the one market that can't resist: China. The plan is simple, cynical, brilliant. Get a nation addicted, reverse the flow of silver, and call it trade. And into this perfect storm steps David Sassoon. He doesn't invent the system, he perfects it. While others fight over prices and routes, Sassoon studies flow: how drugs move, how power moves, how to control both without ever appearing to. Within a decade, he becomes the Rothschild of the East. His ships line Bombay's harbor, his warehouses fill with poppy bricks stamped with the Sassoon seal. His influence reaches from the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea. He builds schools, synagogues, hospitals, philanthropy funded by poison. The city loves him, the empire blesses him, and China begins to die. By the 1830s, Sassoon S-ships are carrying more than 30,000 chests of opium a year, millions of pounds of the drug. Entire Chinese cities collapse into addiction. Work halts, silver drains, families vanish into smoke. The government in Beijing panics, appointing Commissioner Lin Zexu to stop the trade. Lin seizes and destroys over 1,400 tons of opium, a mountain of Sassoon's fortune. And Britain responds the only way empires ever do when profit is threatened. It goes to war. The First Opium War, 1839-1842. British gunboats shell Chinese ports. Steamships crush wooden fleets. The empire wins easily, and the Treaty of Nanking forces China to pay compensation, open new ports, and cede Hong Kong, a prize Sassoon and his partners quickly seize. From refugee to empire builder in less than a generation, David Sassoon's transformation is complete. He's no longer the hunted man of Baghdad. He's the merchant prince of the British Raj. But the real genius of the Sassoons wasn't in how they made their money. It was in how they washed it. They turned drug profits into infrastructure, opium into architecture, sin into legacy. Every dock, every library, every school in Bombay bearing the Sassoon name was a monument not to charity but but to amnesia. Because power doesn't erase guilt, it builds over it. By the 1840s, the British Empire has found its bloodstream, and running through it, faster than gold, stronger than silver, is opium. The Sassoon family doesn't just ride that wave, they become it. David Sassoon's warehouses hum day and night. His fleet grows, his fortune expands. Every ship leaving Bombay for Canton carries the same cargo, carefully packed chests of poppy resin, each one stamped with the mark of a family that now holds the fate of millions in its hands. But to understand the scale, you must understand the system. This isn't smuggling, this isn't crime, it's policy. The British East India Company runs it like a government, complete with taxes, licenses, and oversight. Every poppy grown, every ounce processed, every sale recorded. The company profits, the empire profits, the Sassoons profit most of all. They're not hiding in the shadows. They're the darlings of Bombay society. David Sassoon funds schools and hospitals. He's photographed beside British governors, hailed as proof that under the British flag, a refugee can become royalty. But behind the donations, behind the quiet piety and the polished English manners, the machine grinds on. By 1845, Sassoon and Coburn is exporting over 35,000 chests of opium to China every year. Each chest weighs more than 120 pounds. That's nearly 2 million kilograms of narcotics flowing into Chinese veins annually. Addiction becomes epidemic, China's economy collapses, entire provinces trade productivity for oblivion, and the Sassoons count their profits in silver. Then comes 1842, the Treaty of Nanking. The British win the war. Hong Kong is theirs. And the Sassoons, loyal to the empire, useful to its goals, get first access to the new ports. Canton, Shanghai, Amoy, Ningbo, Foochow, all open to trade, all soon filled with Sassoon agents. By the 1850s, the Sassoons dominate the opium trade from India to China, not by force, not by fear, by efficiency. They understand the power of logistics, a lesson that would later define global capitalism. They finance farmers in India, ensuring poppies bloom even in drought. They own the warehouses in Bombay and Calcutta, where the opium is refined and packed. They build their own fleet of ships, so they don't depend on others. They insure those ships through their own insurance company, E, so they profit even when disaster strikes. They employ translators, intermediaries, clerks, each one a link in a chain of dependence that stretches across continents. In China, they build partnerships with local traders, using silver from addiction to buy silk, tea, and porcelain. They flood the market with British goods, creating a perfect cycle of dependency. China loses its silver, Britain gains it back. The Sassoons become the bridge between both worlds. Merchants of misery dressed as men of progress. When Commissioner Lin Zexu tries again to stop the trade, when he destroys opium shipments and pleads for moral sanity, the British respond again, with cannons. The Second Opium War, 1856-1860. This time the British are joined by France. The results are catastrophic. Foreign armies march into Beijing. They burn the old summer palace, a cultural treasure turned to ash. And when the smoke clears, a new treaty is signed, one that legalizes opium entirely. For the Sassoons, it's paradise. The trade no longer needs secrecy. It's sanctioned, regulated, and protected by law, and they expand with surgical precision. In Shanghai, they establish their headquarters, David Sassoon and Cohen, soon known as the House of Opium. In Bombay, they fund public works. In London, they buy respectability. David's son Abdullah, who anglicizes his name to Albert, takes over the empire and perfects its image. He dresses like an English gentleman. He sends his sons to Oxford. He builds libraries, docks, and hospitals, all bearing the Sassoon name. He becomes Sir Albert Sassoon, Knight Commander of the Order of the Star of India. The British Empire rewards its most useful partner. By the 1860s, the Sassoon fortune is astronomical. They control 70% of the global opium trade. Their ships dominate Asian waters. Their offices operate in Bombay, Hong Kong, Shanghai, London, and Calcutta. They have become the first true multinational corporation, but wealth breeds blindness. As the Sassoons celebrate their success in marble halls, China drowns. By 1870, an estimated 12 million Chinese are addicted. Entire families disintegrate, villages vanish, the nation's silver reserves collapse by half. The empire that once saw itself as the center of civilization is reduced to a debtor state, bought and sold through addiction. And yet, in the ledgers of London, this isn't tragedy, it's triumph. The numbers go up, the markets stabilize. The banks profit. History calls it the age of trade. But trade is just a polite word for extraction. David Sassoon dies in 1864. Wealthy, respected, untouchable. He is buried in Bombay beneath a marble tomb, his epitaph written not in sorrow but in success. To the city he helped build, he is a philanthropist, a hero, a self-made man. To the millions he helped addict, he is something else entirely. But history rarely listens to the defeated. It writes songs for the victors. And the Sassoons for now have won. Empires rarely apologize. They rebrand. By the late 19th century, the Sassoon fortune is vast, measured not just in silver but in silence. Their wealth stretches from the docks of Bombay to the banks of London. They've conquered trade, shipping, and finance. But their greatest victory isn't economic, it's moral. They have turned a drug empire into a dynasty of philanthropy. They've learned the oldest alchemy of power. When your fortune is built on suffering, build monuments tall enough to cast a shadow over it. David Sassoon's sons perfect the formula. Albert, the eldest, becomes the family's ambassador to respectability. He trades the robes of an Eastern merchant for the tailored suit of an English gentleman. He hosts lavish dinners for British officials. He donates to schools, hospitals, and libraries. He funds the David Sassoon Library and Reading Room in Bombay, Sondable Kulit Ajum Mas, a temple of learning financed by opium, and the transformation works. The British Empire, ever hungry for loyal intermediaries, welcomes him with open arms. In 1872, Queen Victoria knights him. Sir Albert Sassoon, Knight Commander of the Star of India. A Jewish merchant from Baghdad, whose family helped flood China with narcotics, now walks the marble corridors of the empire as one of its most respected subjects. In London, the Sassoons buy mansions, collect art, host parties, marry into the aristocracy. The family becomes part of Britain's social elite, a dynasty so refined that few remember what bought their refinement. But memory has a price, and every empire that forgets its origins eventually faces its reflection. As the Sassoons rise in the West, the East collapses under the weight of their legacy. China's addiction deepens. By the 1880s, opium addiction touches nearly every social class, from peasants to scholars, soldiers to merchants. Entire generations grow up in a haze of dependency. The Chinese economy, once one of the largest in the world, is drained of its wealth and willpower, and the profits that might have rebuilt it now line the vaults of London banks. But in Bombay, the story is different. There, the Sassoon name is sacred. Schools for poor children bear their crest. Hospitals built with opium money save lives every day. The Sassoons employ thousands, pay well, and give generously. They are remembered not as dealers, but as donors. It's the perfect disguise, philanthropy as moral camouflage. Because money, when properly laundered through charity, no longer smells of blood. It smells of progress. Albert's children carry the illusion further. His son, Edward Albert Sassoon, enters British Parliament. His grandson, Philip Sassoon, becomes a government minister, an advisor to Winston Churchill, and one of the most flamboyant socialites of his age. By the early 20th century, the Sassoons aren't merchants anymore. They're part of the establishment. They dine with kings. They shape policy. They collect impressionist art and fund universities. And yet, beneath the glitter, the foundation is the same. Opium. The fortune never died. It simply changed clothes. The family motto might as well have been, make the world forget where your money came from. It's not just the Sassoons who perfect this art. The Rockefellers, the Sacklers, the Hearsts, they all follow the same path. Exploit, profit, donate, redeem. It's a moral laundering cycle as old as empire itself. But even alchemy has limits. By the turn of the century, the opium trade begins to change. Public opinion shifts. New regulations appear. Western governments begin condemning what they once encouraged. The Sassoons, ever pragmatic, begin to pivot. They invest in textiles, real estate, and finance. They build mills in Bombay and banks in Hong Kong. They create Sassoon Spinning and Weaving Company, turning labor instead of addiction into profit. It's a cleaner business, respectable, stable, but not as profitable. Meanwhile, the family itself begins to split. One branch, the Bombay Sassoons, stays in India, maintaining old ties to trade and philanthropy. Another branch, the London Sassoons, dives deep into European society, intermarrying with the Rothschilds, the only family whose wealth could match theirs. For a time, it seems eternal on the perfect union of finance, politics, and culture. The Jewish refugees of Baghdad are now the crowned elite of the Western world. Their portraits hang in galleries, their names are carved in marble, their sins are written in invisible ink. But history doesn't forget. It only waits. Because the same forces that built the Sassoon Empire, colonial privilege, global trade, imperial protection, are about to collapse. And when they do, the empire of addiction will face a new kind of reckoning. Not from God, not from guilt, but from time. Every empire believes it's immortal, until history reminds it otherwise. For a century, the Sassoon name meant certainty. Trade routes that never slept. Ships that always returned full. Contracts sealed not in ink, but in influence. But beneath the marble, cracks had already formed. The world that made the Sassoons powerful, colonial, hierarchical, European, was beginning to die. The year is 1914. The Great War erupts. Europe tears itself apart, and with it, the web of commerce that sustained families like the Sassoons. Shipping routes collapse, markets freeze. The same global system that once made them untouchable now makes them vulnerable. Albert's grandson, Sir Philip Sassoon, becomes the face of a new generation. Elegant, flamboyant, brilliant. He's an art collector, a politician, a host of kings and writers. His home, Port Lympne, glows with the energy of empire at its peak. But even as he entertains Churchill and T.E. Lawrence, the family business is quietly unraveling. The opium trade, once legal, lucrative, and blessed, has become taboo. Governments, under public pressure, begin regulating narcotics. The League of Nations condemns the trade, and what was once the foundation of the Sassoon fortune now becomes a stain to be erased. So the family reinvents again. They pour money into textiles, into real estate, into banks and bonds. They sell factories, fund construction, build hotels, open clubs. But the spirit of the old empire, on that cold mathematical hunger, is gone. Wealth becomes lifestyle. Business becomes culture. Meanwhile, in Asia, the world is shifting. The British Empire is weakening. Indian nationalism is rising. And in China, revolution brews. For over a century, foreign families, the Sassoons among them, have ruled Shanghai's waterfront like kings. Their offices dominate the Bund, a skyline of stone and pride, but resentment grows in the streets. To the Chinese, the Sassoons are not benefactors, they are symbols of exploitation, of humiliation, of a century of addiction. When the Chinese Communist Party begins to rise, their message is clear: never again. Never again will foreign merchants control Chinese soil. Never again will a foreign name own Chinese suffering. And then, in 1949, the revolution triumphs. Mao Zedong stands on Tiananmen Square and declares, China has stood up. For the Sassoons, it's the end of the line. Every property, every investment, every building in Shanghai seized, gone. A century of empire erased in a single decree. Victor Sassoon, the last great patriarch, flees with what he can carry. He settles in the Bahamas, watching the East, the source of his family's wealth, disappear behind the red curtain of history. He is old now, reflective, yet unrepentant. He builds hotels, invests in real estate, hosts celebrities and royals, but something is missing. The grandeur feels hollow. The power, once absolute, now exists only in memory. He dies in 1961, alone, wealthy, but without an empire. The Sassoon name, once synonymous with fortune and fear, becomes a footnote in history books. And yet, the irony is merciless. The same China that drove them out later becomes the global factory of capitalism, the very system the Sassoons once mastered. The poppy fields of India are gone, but the dependency remains, now on goods, data, and dollars instead of drugs. The cycle continues. Only the product changes. The Sassoons are gone. But the architecture of their empire, the global trade networks, the banking practices, the art of laundering vice through virtue, those survive. They live on in the multinationals, the pharmaceutical giants, the corporations that profit from dependence and disguise it as progress. History doesn't repeat. It evolves. And in the polished skyscrapers of London, Hong Kong, and New York, you can still feel the ghost of David Sassoon, the refugee who mastered the empire that exiled him. Empires don't die. They reincarnate. The Sassoons are gone. Their palaces turn to archives, their portraits collecting dust. But the machinery they built, the architecture of addiction, never stopped running. It simply changed costume. The opium pipe became a pill bottle. The merchant became a corporation. The empire became a market. A century after David Sassoon's chests of opium left Bombay, another family began building an empire from the same raw material, dependence. The Sacklers. Different century, same playbook. OxyContin replaced opium. The British Empire was gone, but the American pharmaceutical industry had inherited its logic. Addiction as business, marketing as morality, profit as destiny. The Sacklers didn't invent pain, they industrialized it. They used psychology, marketing, and influence to sell addiction as healing, just as the Sassoons had once sold medicine to China. And when the bodies began to pile up, when the lawsuits came, they followed the script David Sassoon wrote in Bombay: deny, deflect, donate. Hospitals, museums, universities, each bearing their name, each serving as both monument and mask. History doesn't repeat word for word. It rhymes. And the rhyme is profitable, because every system built on addiction needs three things to survive: a product, a permission, and a purpose. The substance evolves, from opium to OxyContin to the digital high of dopamine. The permission stays the same: governments that look away, and the purpose never dies, to turn human weakness into financial strength. Look closely at the Sassoon story and you'll see the blueprint of the modern world. Global logistics, brand image, vertical integration, philanthropy as absolution. Every multinational today runs on the same operating system. The Sassoons perfected the algorithm before the word existed. They created global dependency, then sold the cure for it. They destroyed lives, then bought redemption with charity. They broke nations, then built monuments in their honor, and we let them. Because we love the story of success, of vision, of progress. We called them pioneers, industrialists, innovators. We still do. The only difference now is scale. Today the drugs are digital. The addiction lives in our hands. Likes, shares, notifications, neural opioids, algorithmic high, and the companies feeding it are no different from the merchants of Bombay. They sell dependency disguised as connection. They build empires from attention the same way the Sassoons built theirs from addiction. Every tap, every scroll, every purchase is another dose in a system that learned its first lessons from 19th century poppy fields. So, when we talk about progress, we're really talking about refinement, the evolution of control, the same logic, the same moral math, wrapped in newer code. Because at its core, the story of the Sassoon Empire is not about drugs. It's about design, the design of systems that extract value from human desire, then rebrand exploitation as innovation. That's what makes it timeless. And yet, there's a bitter irony. The same China that once burned Sassoon as opium is now the world's largest producer of fentanyl precursors, the chemicals that fuel a new global epidemic. History didn't end, it outsourced itself. In the end, every empire of addiction ends the same way. The product changes, the victims change, but the profit remains sacred. David Sassoon died believing he had built something divine, a network, an inheritance, a legacy. He was right, but not in the way he imagined. His legacy lives in the bloodstream of global capitalism, in every company that profits from dependency, every institution that buys forgiveness with generosity, every empire that calls control a public service. Because the true genius of the Sassoons was not that they sold opium, it was that they taught the world how to turn exploitation into respectability. They turned addiction into economy. They turned empire into morality. They turned suffering into civilization. And as long as there is profit to be made from pain, as long as charity can cleanse a conscience, the House of Sassoon will never really fall. Its walls may have crumbled, its name may have faded, but its system, its beautiful, ruthless system, still hums quietly beneath the surface of our world. Some empires end with revolutions, others end with silence. The Sassoon Empire ended with neither. It simply dissolved into the bloodstream of modern civilization. Today their buildings still stand. The David Sassoon Library, the Sassoon Dock, the stone skeletons of an empire built on addiction and absolution. But the family name has faded, like a watermark on history. What remains is not memory, but method. The Sassoons didn't invent exploitation. They perfected its efficiency. They built a system so adaptable that when the product of addiction changed, the structure didn't need to. It simply rebranded. Once the world's addiction came from poppies. Now it comes from pixels. The narcotic is no longer smoked in dens by lantern light. It glows from screens. It scrolls endlessly. It asks for your attention, not your silver. And it rewards you, and not with pleasure, but with the promise of more. The Opium War was fought with cannons and contracts. The attention war is fought with code and dopamine. But the principle is the same. Find the weakness, industrialize it, and call it progress. The Sassoons would have admired the elegance. They'd recognize the business model instantly. A product that creates dependency, a consumer who mistakes that dependency for choice, and an empire that thrives in the space between. Look at your screen. Look at the endless stream of news, ads, alerts. Every tap, every swipe, every click, it's a microdose. It hits the same circuitry opium once did. A digital high, clean and quiet, engineered for repetition. And the modern merchants? They wear the same smile Albert Sassoon wore. They speak of innovation, connection, empowerment. They fund universities, plant trees, build hospitals. Philanthropy once again as camouflage. It's the same theater, just with better lighting. The ghost of David Sassoon walks among us, not in the alleys of Bombay, but in the code of your favorite app, in the language of the corporate mission statement, in the quiet normalization of dependency as design. Every algorithm that learns your habits, every platform that keeps you scrolling, is a descendant of his empire. Because he understood the most profitable truth of all: control the habit, and you control the human. We like to believe we've outgrown empires, that we've become free, enlightened, informed, but freedom today is measured in bandwidth, and attention is the new silver. We trade it willingly, for comfort, for validation, for convenience. And just like the Chinese merchants who once lined up for opium, we stand in digital queues, hungry for another hit of information. History's cruelty is its continuity. The Sassoons built an economy of dependency. We inherited it, and we called it modern life. Their story is not ancient history, it's the prequel. Because the Ghost Empire never vanished, it adapted. It learned to hide behind code, behind progress, behind philanthropy. It doesn't need a face anymore, it doesn't need a name, it just needs you to believe that what you consume is choice, not design. And that's the final illusion, the most dangerous one of all. The Sassoon Empire is gone, but its spirit, the spirit of power disguised as virtue, still hums beneath the modern world. It lives in the way we work, the way we buy, the way we believe. Because addiction isn't about the substance, it's about the system. And in that sense, the ghost of the Sassoons still rules the world, not through opium, but through us. History remembers the heroes, but the world we live in was built by the invisible, by men who turned pain into profit and profit into virtue. The Sassoons are gone, their names carved into libraries, not ledgers, but their design remains. An architecture of control, passed down from opium to industry, from empire to algorithm. We still breathe inside their creation. Every addiction, every dependency, every illusion of choice echoes their blueprint. The House of Sassoon fell long ago, but the Ghost Empire endures, not in history books, in us.